So this is Rattler, stage 2, 3.29 miles. Thank you.
2 minutes?
No.
What's the start time?
08, so 23 seconds.
Okay.
Okay, armed. This is left 4, right 5 minus opens 15 seconds.
Left
10.
4, right 5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Left 4, right 5 minus opens 100. Left 5 minus over kick 180.
Holy crap!
Stay left over flat crest 250. Left 5 minus over crest loose.
Left 5?
Left 5 minus over crest loose 150. Go, go, go. Left 6, 30, small jump 100. Right 5, stay out. Left 5 plus 70. Right 4, pinks 450. Nice. Left 5 plus long, tightens 4 plus, no cut 50. Repeat, left 5 plus long, tightens 4 plus, no cut 50. Left 4 camber 50.
There's
Yep,
a rocket.
right 4 no cut long, opens tightens 4 plus long. Go, go, go.
It's tightening.
Left 4 plus, no cut long, 70. Left 6, very long, into small crest 200, chicane left entry. Go, 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 200. Way early.
I know, and it's been opened up too.
Yep, go, go, go. Right 6, 120. Right 4 plus over small crest, no cut, long. Left 5 minus extra long, 120. Right 4, no cut, 70. Stay left over small jump.
Sorry, I want to pick my rocks.
Into right 4 plus over small crest. Crest into a left 5 no cut opens 50. Right 5 minus no cut into a left 5 minus over small crest, no cut opens very long 50. Big crest 70.
Next.
Right 6, left 6 into long small crest 50. Go, go, go. Right 5 plus very long, tightens 5 minus over crest 50, finish 150. Repeat, tightens 5 minus over crest 50, finish 150. Good job. Slow down.
I'm trying.
Good job. But I don't think we finished in the same minutes.